I need to sleep this off, Alex muttered, slamming his bedroom door like a guillotine. And then, in the dim glow of the floor lamp, Daniel's dad, Mark, broad-shouldered, silver-streaked hair, the kind of man who fixed leaky faucets and mowed lawns at dawn, didn't move from the worn leather armchair. His eyes, usually steady as Lake Michigan, flickered with something Daniel couldn't name, and he poured 2 fingers of bourbon into mismatched glasses, sliding one across the coffee table. Sit, Mark said, voice low and gravelly, the first crack in the facade of the father who'd raised him alone since Mom's accident a decade ago. Daniel collapsed onto the couch, knees buckling under the weight of the night, his heart pounding like it might claw its way out. The bourbon burned going down, but it was nothing compared to the fire in his chest, the fear that this truth, spilled out in a tipsy haze after too many beers at the neighborhood bar, would unravel everything. Alex had been his anchor since high school, the straight-laced jock who'd stuck by him through awkward crushes and whispered secrets. But tonight, over greasy pizza in the kitchen, the dam had broken. Now, with Alex upstairs nursing his shock, it was just Daniel and his dad, the man who'd bandaged scraped knees and taught him to throw a curveball, staring across a chasm wider than the Mississippi. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees, glass cradled in calloused hands that still smelled faintly of motor oil from his auto shop. "You think this changes anything?" he asked, not accusing, but probing, like he was diagnosing an engine knock. Daniel's throat tightened. He'd braced for anger, disappointment, the classic Midwestern shutdown. Instead, Mark's gaze held steady, searching his son's face. The same hazel eyes, the same stubborn tilt to the chin. "Dad, I didn't mean for it to come out like that. Alex is straight, he's always been." "Son," Mark interrupted, softer than Daniel had heard in years, since the night they buried Mom under a gray November sky. "I'm not talking about Alex." He set his glass down, the clink echoing like a heartbeat. Daniel froze, the room shrinking around them, the rain outside a distant roar. Mark's hand reached out, not to pat his shoulder like old times, but to rest there, thumb brushing the nape of Daniel's neck in a gesture so tender, so unintended, that it sent a jolt through him like live wire. And in that touch, something shifted. Unspoken, electric, forbidden. The air thickening with the scent of bourbon and rain-soaked earth, pulling them into a gravity neither could escape. Daniel pulled back first, not sharply, but enough to break the spell, his skin tingling where Mark's fingers had lingered. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, voice cracking, half accusation, half yearning he didn't dare name. Mark's face darkened, not with regret, but with a raw honesty that peeled back layers Daniel had never seen. "I don't know, Danny. God help me, I don't." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, broad back silhouetted against the storm, hands raking through his hair. Daniel watched, pulse racing, the man he'd idolized, stoic, unbreakable, crumbling before him. This wasn't the dad who cheered at his little league games or grilled burgers for 4th of July block parties. This was a stranger, vulnerable, his eyes reflecting the same storm raging inside Daniel. They talked then, words tumbling out like the rain, halting at first, then flooding. Daniel confessed the isolation of high school hallways, the crushes on boys who never looked back. The way coming out to Alex tonight felt like jumping off the Willis Tower without a parachute. Mark listened, nodding, his own stories surfacing like ghosts. The lonely nights after Mom's death, the women he'd dated briefly but never loved, the questions he'd buried deeper than her casket. "I thought I was doing right by you," Mark said, sinking back into the chair, voice hoarse. "Being the rock. But rocks get heavy, son. They crack." Daniel reached for his glass, fingers brushing Mark's again. Accidental, deliberate? And neither pulled away this time. The clock ticked past midnight, the house creaking like it held its breath. And in that suspended moment, Daniel felt the pull, magnetic and terrifying, a line blurring that should have stayed etched in stone. By 1 a.m., the bourbon bottle was half empty, and Alex's snores filtered faintly from upstairs, a reminder of the world beyond this room. Daniel's head swam, not just from the liquor, but from the revelations. Mark admitting he'd suspected for years, the quiet pride in his voice when he said, "You're braver than I ever was." And then, in a whisper that hung between them like smoke, Mark added, "There's more to me than you know, Danny. Things I never said." Daniel's breath hitched. He wanted to bolt, to laugh it off as drunk talk, but his body betrayed him, leaning closer, drawn to the warmth radiating from his father's frame. The unexpected happened not in a crash, but in a slow unraveling. Their knees touching on the coffee table's edge, Mark's hand finding Daniel's in the shadows, squeezing with a desperation that mirrored his own. Dawn crept in like a thief, gray light seeping through the curtains, turning the living room into a watercolor of regrets and half-truths. Daniel woke with a start on the couch, neck stiff, mouth cotton dry. Mark's armchair empty, but the blanket he'd draped over Daniel in the night folded neatly beside him. Upstairs, the shower ran. Alex, probably oblivious or pretending to be. Daniel's mind replayed the hours in fragments. The touch, the confessions, the way Mark's eyes had darkened when Daniel asked, voice barely audible, "What do you mean more to me?" And Mark's reply, after a long silence, "I felt things, son. For men. Buried it deep. For you. For her memory. But it's there." He bolted upright, heart slamming against his ribs, the weight of it crushing. This wasn't some after-school special. This was his life, splintering under the truth. He grabbed his phone. 3:47 a.m. had been the last text from Alex. "We'll talk tomorrow. Don't freak." Easy for him to say. Daniel paced the kitchen, brewing coffee that tasted like ash, staring at the family photos on the fridge. Him at prom with a girl he'd ghosted emotionally. Mom's smile frozen in time. Mark hoisting him on shoulders at Wrigley Field. Normal. Safe. Lies. The basement door creaked open, and Mark emerged, hair damp, flannel shirt untucked over jeans, looking every bit the working-class hero of Daniel's childhood. But his eyes, those hazel mirrors, held shadows now unguarded. "Morning," he said, pouring himself a mug, movements deliberate, like he was handling nitro. Daniel nodded, throat tight, the air between them charged, unspoken. "Alex still out?" Mark asked, glancing at the stairs. "Yeah, passed out cold. A beat. About last night." "Don't," Daniel cut in, sharper than intended, slamming his mug down. Splashes of coffee dotted the counter like blood. "We can't just pretend that didn't happen. You touched me, Dad. Like it meant something." Mark's face tightened, jaw working, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell the soap on his skin, fresh and clean against the stale bourbon from hours ago. "It did mean something," Mark admitted, voice low, eyes locking on. "To me. To you, maybe. I saw it in your face, Danny. That hunger. I've known it too long to ignore it now." Daniel's world tilted. Hunger. The word landed like a punch, stirring something primal. Forbidden. He backed against the fridge, magnets clattering, but Mark followed. Not aggressive, but inexorable, like the lake wind off Michigan Avenue. "You're my son?" Daniel whispered, more plea than protest, but his body arched toward the heat, traitorous. Mark stopped inches away, hand lifting to cup Daniel's cheek, thumb tracing the line of his jaw, echoing last night's nape brush, but bolder, intentional. "I know," Mark murmured, breath warm against Daniel's temple. "That's what makes it hell. But denying it? That's been my hell for 20 years. Their lips met then. Not a kiss, but a collision, desperate and salty with unshed tears. Daniel gasped into it, hands fisting Mark's shirt, pulling him closer even as his mind screamed stop. It was fire and flood, the taste of coffee mingling with the faint whiskey on Mark's tongue. Bodies pressing in the narrow kitchen like they could fuse and erase the sin. Seconds, minutes, time dissolved, until Alex's footsteps thumped overhead, yanking them apart like a cold shower. Mark stepped back, chest heaving, eyes wild. "Go," he rasped, "before he comes down." Daniel fled to his room, slamming the door, sliding down it as sobs racked him. Relief, shame, a love so twisted it burned. The day dragged like a hangover. Alex emerged sheepish, slapping Daniel's back at breakfast with a forced grin. "Dude, last night was heavy, but you're my brother. Okay? Doesn't change shit." Relief washed over Daniel, but it was tainted, his skin still humming from Mark's touch across the table, their eyes avoiding like magnets repelling. They spent the afternoon at the arcade in Lincoln Park, blasting zombies on screens while Alex rambled about girls from work, oblivious to Daniel's distraction. But every laugh felt hollow, every glance at his phone. Mark's text, We need to talk. Tonight. Twisted the knife deeper. Evening fell, the house quiet as Alex crashed early again, jet-lagged from a work trip that had brought him home just for this weekend. Daniel found Mark in the garage, tinkering with the old Chevy, sleeves rolled up, grease-streaked forearms flexing under the fluorescent hum. "Dad?" Daniel started, voice unsteady, but Mark straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, his gaze fierce. "Not here," he said, nodding toward the back door. They slipped into the yard, the chain-link fence rattling in the wind, fireflies winking like conspirators in the dusk. Under the old oak, where Daniel had carved his initials at 12, Mark pulled him into an embrace that started paternal, but melted into something else. Arms wrapping tight, lips brushing Daniel's ear. "I can't stop thinking about you," Mark confessed, words muffled against his hair. "It's wrong, I know, but you're all I see now." Daniel shivered, hands sliding up Mark's back, feeling the ridges of scars from a shop accident years ago. Marks of a life hard-lived. "What do we do?" he whispered, forehead to forehead, breath sinking in the cooling air. Mark's kiss this time was slower, exploratory, tongues tentative as if mapping uncharted territory. They sank to the grass, hidden by the tree's shadow, hands roaming with a reverence that bordered on worship. Daniel tracing the salt and pepper hair on Mark's chest, Mark's fingers gentle on the curve of Daniel's hip. It escalated in whispers and touches, clothes shedding like old skins, bodies entwining under the stars. Daniel lost himself in the rhythm, the contrast of Mark's stubble against his throat, the low groans that vibrated through them both. It was ecstasy laced with agony, love blooming in the darkest soil. Afterward, spent and tangled, Mark held him close, murmuring apologies into his hair. "We'll figure it out," he promised. But Daniel heard the lie in it. The world wouldn't bend for this. Weeks blurred into a secret rhythm, Chicago's autumn leaves turning the streets into a blaze of red and gold that mirrored the fire in Daniel's veins. By day, he was the barista at the corner cafe in Wicker Park, slinging lattes to hipsters with tattoos and trust funds, flashing easy smiles that hid the storm. Nights, when Alex jetted off to his consulting gigs in New York, the house became theirs, a stolen Eden. Mark would cook pasta in the kitchen, sleeves pushed up, laughing at Daniel's attempts to chop garlic without mangling it. They'd eat on the porch swing, feet tangled, talking dreams. Daniel's half-baked plans for art school, Mark's quiet wish to fix up the Chevy and road trip Route 66 someday. Just the two of them. But love like theirs was a house of cards in a windstorm. The touches lingered longer, the kisses deeper, bodies knowing each other in ways that blurred father and lover. Daniel would wake in Mark's bed, sheets twisted around them, sunlight slanting through blinds to paint stripes on sweat-damp skin. "I love you," he'd whisper, the words slipping out unbidden one morning, and Mark's response. A fierce kiss, hands cradling his face, sealed it. Yet doubt gnawed. The age gap, the blood tie, the whispers of incest that echoed in Daniel's mind like a bad dream. Mark sensed it, pulling him closer. "We're more than labels, Danny. We're us." Alex's return trips were minefields. He'd crash on the couch, oblivious at first, cracking jokes about Daniel's glow-up and Mark's sudden interest in indie films. Code for the DVDs they'd watched tangled on the couch, hands wandering. But cracks formed. One night, over beers in the den, Alex cornered Daniel. "Something's off, man. You and your old man. You're weirdly close lately." Daniel laughed it off. "He's just lonely since I moved back." But Alex's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering like a faulty bulb. The betrayal came swift as a Lake Michigan gale. It was a crisp October Friday, Alex in town for a Cubs game that rained out. Daniel slipped away mid-inning, texting Mark, "Meet me at the pier." They met under the shadow of the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier, wind whipping off the water, hands clasped behind a concrete pillar. The kiss was urgent, Mark's back to the wall, Daniel's fingers in his hair, until a flash lit the dusk. Alex, phone raised, face ashen in the glow. "What the fuck?" he roared, voice carrying over the waves. The confrontation exploded back home, Alex pacing the living room like a caged wolf, Mark silent in his armchair. Daniel wedged between them on the couch, gut churning. "My best friend and my dad?" Alex spat, betrayal carving lines into his boyish face. "How long? How could you?" Daniel stammered apologies, tears hot. It just happened, we didn't mean. But Alex whirled on Mark. You're supposed to protect him, not this sick shit. Mark rose, steady as ever. But his voice broke. I love him, Alex. More than I should. But it's real. Alex's laugh was bitter, shattering. Love? This is fucked up. I'm telling everyone. Your shop buddies, the neighbors, hell, the whole damn town. He grabbed his keys, storming out into the night, tires screeching as he peeled away. Daniel chased him to the porch, barefoot in the cold, begging, please, don't. It'll destroy us. But Alex's taillights vanished, leaving echoes of tires on wet pavement. The fallout was biblical. By morning, whispers snaked through the neighborhood like ivy. Mark's phone buzzing with voicemails from lifelong friends, his boss at the shop calling an indefinite leave. Daniel's cafe shifts turned awkward, customers averting eyes. A coworker murmuring, heard about your family drama. Isolation closed in, a noose tightening. Mark retreated into workaholic silence, coming home late, collapsing into bed without a word. Daniel tried bridging the gap. Dinners untouched, touches rebuffed. But the fire dimmed to embers. Climax hit on All Hallows Eve. The streets alive with costumed kids and jack-o'-lantern grins that mocked their gloom. Daniel found Mark in the garage, bottle of Jack in hand, tools scattered like battlefield debris. We can't keep this up, Mark slurred, eyes bloodshot. I'm poison for you, Danny. Always have been. Daniel's heart fractured. No, we fight. Together. But Mark shoved him away, voice rising. You think I want this? Watching you suffer because of me. The shove turned to a grab, pulling Daniel close in fury and despair. Their argument dissolving into a bruising kiss, bodies slamming against the workbench. It was raw, almost violent. Nails raking, teeth nipping, a reclaiming amid the ruins. Daniel cried into Mark's neck as they moved together. The release a catharsis, sobs mingling with gasps. Afterward, curled on a drop cloth amid paint cans, Mark confessed the deepest cut. Before your mom, there was a guy. In the army. We kept it secret. He died in Nam, and I swore I'd never again. Then you look like him sometimes. Daniel's world spun. Grief for a ghost, jealousy for a memory. But it humanized Mark, made their bond a tapestry of losses woven tight. Yet dawn brought no absolution. Alex's final text sealed the wound. Disowned you both. Don't contact me. The betrayal stung deepest from him. The friend who'd promised forever, now the executioner. Winter clamped down on Chicago like a vice, snow blanketing the streets in hush, burying sins under white veils. The house, once alive with laughter and stolen touches, turned mausoleum. Echoes of slammed doors and unspoken accusations. Daniel dropped out of community college. The art classes he'd loved now sketches of fractured faces in his notebook. Mark's profile, etched with regret. Alex's back, turned forever. Job hunting yielded nothing. The scandal clung like tar, doors slamming in his face from the north side to the loop. Mark fared worse. The shop firing him outright after a customer spat slurs in the waiting room. He took odd jobs. Snow plowing at dawn, bartending dives on the south side. Coming home reeking of cheap whiskey and cheaper cologne, collapsing without a word. Daniel watched him unravel. The man who'd been his North Star fading to a flicker. One blizzard night, as winds howled like banshees, Daniel found Mark in the attic, rifling Mom's old boxes. Photo albums yellowed, her wedding dress moth-eaten in plastic. What are we doing? Daniel whispered, kneeling beside him, hand on Mark's knee. Mark's eyes, hollowed by shadows, met his. Surviving. Barely. The attic air was thick with dust and memory. But when Daniel leaned in, Mark didn't pull away. Their kiss was gentle, a balm, lips tentative, hands rediscovering paths worn smooth. It led them downstairs, to the bedroom that had been theirs, bodies moving with a slowness born of loss. No frenzy this time, but a quiet communion. Mark tracing the freckles across Daniel's shoulders like constellations. Daniel kissing the worry lines on his forehead, whispering, I choose you, every time. Spring thawed the ice, but not the rift. Alex's silence was a void, his social media scrubbed of them both. A digital grave. Daniel tried outreach. A letter mailed to his apartment, words pouring out. You were my first love, platonic but pure. Forgive me for breaking us. No reply. The neighborhood stares softened to pity, then indifference. Life's churn burying the scandal under new dramas. Divorces, DUIs. Mark landed steady work at a body shop in Evanston. His hands steady again on wrenches, if not on Daniel's heart. Yet conflict simmered, bubbling in quiet moments. Daniel pushed for openness. We could move, start over in San Francisco, where no one knows. Mark resisted, rooted like the oak in the yard. This is home, Danny. Running makes us cowards. Arguments flared. Daniel accusing Mark of clinging to ghosts. Mark snapping that Daniel's idealism ignored the world's teeth. One night, it peaked, Daniel storming out after Mark dismissed his dreams of gallery shows as fairy tale bullshit. He wandered the lakefront, waves lapping like accusations, until Mark found him at sunrise, coat draped over shivering shoulders. I'm scared, Mark admitted, pulling him into the truck's cab, engine rumbling to life. They drove aimlessly, past the skyline's glass spires, radio crooning Springsteen, Thunder Road, a hymn to escape. Me too, Daniel said, hand on Mark's thigh, the touch grounding. But scared of losing you more. Mark parked at a deserted beach, waves crashing under a pink sky. They made love in the truck bed, blankets from the cab, salt air mingling with their breaths. A reaffirmation, raw and real. Summer bloomed tentative, fireflies returning like old friends. Daniel sold a painting online. An abstract swirl of blues and grays, titled Fractured Light. Enough for a deposit on a studio downtown. Mark surprised him with tickets to an art exhibit at the Art Institute. Awkward in pressed khakis but beaming at Daniel's awe. Their nights wove domesticity with passion. Grocery runs where hands brushed in aisles, slow dances in the kitchen to Coltrane records Mom had loved. Betrayal's scar lingered, though. A chance encounter at a street fair. Alex, arm around a pretty brunette, eyes locking across the crowd. Time froze. Daniel's heart lurched, Mark's hand tightening on his waist. Alex approached, hesitant, the girl trailing. Danny, he said, voice stripped bare. Heard you sold a piece. Congrats. Awkward small talk, then quieter. I was angry, hurt, but I get it now. Kinda. No forgiveness outright, but a crack in the ice. A nod to Mark, a half smile. As they walked away, Daniel exhaled, tears pricking. Healing, he murmured. Mark squeezed his hand. Takes time. The climax crested not in fury, but revelation. Fall returned, leaves carpeting the yard like confetti for a homecoming. Daniel's exhibit opening. A small gallery in Pilsen, walls hung with his truths. Portraits of Mark's hands, calloused and kind. Abstracts of tangled limbs in shadow. The crowd was sparse but warm. Locals who'd thawed. A critic scribbling notes. Mark stood in the corner, proud and pained, until Daniel pulled him aside. This is for us, he said, kissing him softly amid the murmurs. No one batted an eye. The world, in its corner, had moved on. Outside, under street lamps casting halos, Mark dropped to one knee. Not proposal, but plea. Marry me? Not legal, not right by blood, but by heart. Build this with me. Daniel's yes was a sob, pulling him up into an embrace that sealed fates. They didn't run. They rooted deeper, the house their sanctuary. Years later, gray streaking Daniel's temples to match Mark's, they'd sit on that porch swing, hands entwined, watching grandkids. Adopted, loved fierce. From Mark's sister play in the yard. Alex visited sporadically. Scars faded to stories over beers. Betrayal had forged them. Conflict tempered the blade of their love. In the end, it wasn't happily ever after, nor tragedy's dirge, but human, flawed, enduring. A quiet victory against the storm, two souls stitched from the same cloth, warmer for the tears that had mended it.